Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another fascinating edition of This Week in Space. I am your host with the most, your weekly wizard, Joan Emerson Bell, Blind Stallion Space Wizard on the Instagram, coming here to bring you all the astro weather that you need to help you navigate this week in space with some skill, with some ease, helping you to keeping on with the knowledge of what the wandering stars and celestial bodies maybe bringing to the table. And as we kind of like learn about the energies or vibes that we are moving through and sussing out, it gives us a little agency to be able to make good choices for ourselves. And sometimes straight up, we just get like grabbed by a planet, right? Or, washed away in the energy of the cosmos, and that can be okay. But sort of knowing what's happening, what's coming up, gives us an opportunity to kind of reorient and to make informed decisions so that we're not reacting from a wounded place or an impulsive place, but we are able to maybe just have that momentary pause where we can be like, oh, snap. That really brilliant astrologer who comes at me every Monday morning told me about this thing. So let me like see if I can shift a little bit or take a different perspective or, show up in a little bit more of a conscious way to help this kind of work for me, or I can work with it instead of always feeling like we're pushing that boulder up the hill because, that's a hard way to be. I'm coming at you today from the wonderful and magical world of Jessie Roadkill. I get to be in her studio bus today. Big shout out to Jessie. Thank you, my friend, for allowing me to be in your magical land. And yeah, it's really hot in here. It's a wicked scorcher guy. So I'm going to try and get through this without getting heat stroke, but we'll see how it goes. So, without further ado, maybe let's jump into the astrology of the week. So we're looking at this week in space, for July the 16th through June the 16th, getting ahead of myself, June the 16th through June the 22nd of 2025. And we're actually going to rewind the tape just a little bit and touch in on an aspect that we were experiencing yesterday, which was building all through last week, but culminated yesterday, Sunday, June the 15th. I talked about this last week in space, not to be confused with this week in space. But rounding out last week, we had two pretty intense transits that both perfected on Sunday, June the 15th. We had Mars squaring Uranus, and we also had Jupiter in Cancer squaring Saturn in Aries. Both of these like squares are tense aspects. They create a lot of friction. They create challenge. And I talked a lot about the Mars squaring Uranus one in last week's episode, and I touched on Jupiter in Cancer squaring Saturn in Aries, but I just wanted to kind of revisit it because, I think there are a lot of themes that kind of came up from both of these transits. The Mars squaring Uranus kind of creates like impulsivity and rashness and like sudden, unpredictable things. And in the news, we had Israel bombing Iran, which is like seems like pretty impulsive and unhinged. And so that's like popping some shit off. And we also had a Democratic lawmaker who was shot by somebody on Saturday. We had the No Kings protest, like a lot of kind of frenetic, kind of unpredictable, pretty violent energy that was unfolding over the weekend. And I associate some of that with the Mars Uranus square, and I hope that everybody out there is doing safe and is doing all right today because this weekend was like pretty intense. I wanted to just touch a little bit more on the Jupiter Saturn square because I think that this is a pretty important one. And this is sort of the opening square from the Jupiter Saturn conjunction, which occurred way back when on December 21st, the winter solstice in 2020, when we had the Jupiter Saturn conjunction in the great mutation, where now those planets will conjunct every 20 years in air signs for the next 200 years. So a whole new series of cycles beginning on that winter solstice in 2020. That was the first winter of COVID, if y'all can remember back that far, because that feels like, I don't know, like three prequels ago. And now we are receiving the opening square, and this is the third and final square. I think the first one perfected August the 19th of 24, and the second one occurred on December 24th, right around Christmas time of 24. And then this is the third and final opening square. And, the conjunction is this sort of seeding moment where these planets are together, they are mixing their energies, they are sort of like creating a plan, like intentions get set either consciously or unconsciously, dealing with the Jupiterian hope and faith and sense of expansion, and the Saturnian restriction and constriction and limitation, which gives us the opportunity to work within the bounds of reality to make the sort of dreams and the things that we are hoping for, and the things that we believe in, real. And now we hit this opening square where it's like, okay, how is that going? What needs to be adjusted? What needs to be untangled? What needs to be reworked? What do I really want to invest this energy in? What do I want to keep making real? And what maybe needs to get shed because it's not actually working out, or I thought I wanted to do this and it's turning out that it's actually not for me. Right. And so on Sunday, we had this final square where it's sort of reorganizing and maybe releasing some of the tension that has been building around this is what I want and this is what is actually happening, that has been developing since last summer and all through the winter and up until about now. So quite a long time of like renegotiating and rethinking and kind of figuring out the way that the path opens, as we kind of deal with this tension between what we hope for and what we are actually working with. And so I also wanted to think about the Jupiter Saturn square in relationship to some of the protests that have been occurring, right? And over this week, I've been thinking about the square in relationship to the protests in LA and around America concerning ICE kidnapping and detaining people, as well as the No Kings protests that happened around the country that occurred on Saturday, which was Saturn's Day, funnily enough, the day before the transit, and the day before the Jupiter Saturn square and the Mars Uranus square perfected. Right. And in that day before, it's like really kind of like building and building and building. Right. And so Saturn represents restriction, repression, authoritarian forces that are really seeking to maintain the prevailing order. Saturn just wants to maintain the status quo and is like, oh, hell no, things are not going to change. However, Saturn's in Aries, and Aries is a cardinal sign that is sort of like bringing new energy into the situation. And Saturn is like, I want to suppress that. I want to repress that. Like, we are just holding this down in our like dusty ass old patriarchal way, right? And Aries is like, right? I'm struggling for change. I'm creating something different, right? And so I think the Saturn role in this square is being played out by the federal government, right, who has mobilized ICE to indiscriminately abduct people and intimidate communities, right? And then when there was resistance to like these illegal kidnappings by dudes just like rolling up in unmarked cars wearing masks, right? When people were like, oh, hell no, like you can't do this, right? The federal government called in the National Guard, right? And then when people like still didn't listen and were like, oh, hell no, right? Or my favorite sign, this dude holding up like National Guard, LOL. right? Then Trump called in the Marines, right? And as this sort of excessive show of Saturnian force, which seems to have only like escalated an already tense situation, which I think, cops are really good at really escalating situations instead of de-escalating them and finding like a good, peaceful resolution. They just like run in and escalate shit. And so I think the role of Jupiter in Cancer is being played out by the people who have showed up to protect their friends and neighbors and community members. Jupiter is a planet of expansion and hope, right? And seeing all these people showing up to fight the forces of oppression and fascism has definitely given me a lot of hope. I feel very moved by the images that I've seen on the internet and in the news. And, I think I don't know, we'll talk about the news a little bit later. Right. And, watching like civilians and citizens just showing up to protect members of their community has been really inspiring to me, especially at a time when it seems like elected officials aren't really doing very much to stand up to this authoritarian government. They're just like, oh, can you please not do that? Right. And people are like showing up being like, hell no. Right. Like, absolutely not. Right. And so we see normal everyday people risking arrest and experiencing state violence to show up for their neighbors and members of their community. And this feels very like Jupiter and Cancer to me, right? People coming together to support each other, right? When other systems fail. And I think like systems failing is like Saturn in its fall in Aries, as well as Neptune, which is just dissolving things. Right. And I think it's dissolving old systems, and Saturn is really trying hard to like keep it together, but like that shit's getting washed away. Right. And so, um, Jupiter in Cancer is about expanding our capacity to care and increasing the circle of those that we consider belonging to our community, right? And our circle of connection, right? Cancer is all about where we invest our emotional energy. And so Jupiter in Cancer expands the emotional energy that we can invest in the things that we care about. Right. And it seems like a lot of people care about like not having a fascist government. And I respect that and I support that and I care about that also. Right. And as we move through this square, it's a call to really consider what's worth investing in, what's worth putting our vital attention and our emotional energy into, right? And it's really amazing to watch all these people showing up because it's worth investing that vital emotional energy and life force into caring for their community members and neighbors and family members and really fighting the forces of fascism and oppression and people kind of expanding their ideas around who belongs, right? And who we want to care for and support. So Saturn is in their fall in Aries, right? Saturn is laid low. They're in kind of a depression. They're frustrated. And I don't know about y'all, but when I get frustrated, I don't do the best thinking and I kind of like act impulsively or react to the situations around me. And I end up like breaking things or knocking things over and being like, damn it. Right. And that's how Saturn kind of behaves in Aries, right? And so Saturn in Aries is kind of racing to like implement systems of dominance, right? Doing their Saturn thing and feeling like really rushed to get it done. Um, Saturn in Aries has this story that might makes right, right? If I just call out the National Guard, if I call out the military, if I bring more guns, like that'll show them, right? And I don't think that's actually going to work. Right. I think it's really dangerous, but I don't think that is actually going to work over the long term. Right. Saturn in Aries feels very challenged, right? It's in a hole, it's in a depression, it's laid low. So it can act impulsively and try and control everything around it, right? When we feel like we're losing control, the initial reaction is to like try and like amass more control. Right. And so we are seeing this kind of archetype unfolding with the gross mobilization of military forces against American citizens, which I think is pretty egregious. Right. And we saw a great example of Saturn and Aries square Jupiter and Cancer over the weekend on Saturday, when Saturn's Day, when Trump threw himself a military parade and almost nobody showed up. Like the images that I saw were just like empty empty stands, right? With tanks rolling through the street, which is like totally some Saturn and Aries shit right there. Like having tanks rolling down the street. Aries is a sign ruled by Mars, Mars being a warrior who loves conflict and battle, right? And Saturn is this like, forces of control and like putting on this big sort of Saturn and Aries pageantry, and everybody was like, that's lame, right? But the same day, like thousands, if not millions of people showed up all around the country, right, to protest this government and how whack this president is. And so I think we're seeing this kind of square play out in the collective, in kind of interesting ways. So let me just check the comments really. Yeah, and somebody in the comments saying Trump can really say he drew the biggest crowds because everybody showed up all around America to protest him and like talk about how much he sucks. So, moving right along to this week, I just wanted to do that little recap because, I think it's important and I think a lot of this stuff is pretty interesting. I guess that's why I do this. So, on Tuesday, June the 17th, we have the sun in Gemini, sextiling Chiron in Aries. This is going down at 26 degrees and 21 arc minutes. So, Chiron, my boy, right? Is the wounded healer, but also the teacher of heroes. And I like this kind of idea of Chiron as the teacher of heroes better than the wounded healer, which I think is a little played out. I think it's important, but I think it's also, I mean, it kind of flattens Chiron, makes this very complex centaur a little two-dimensional. And I like this idea of like what it is to be heroic and what it means to learn to be heroic and the people that teach us to be heroic. And this can be books, it can be characters in movies, it can be actual teachers, right? It can be life experiences that teach us to be heroic. And so I think that this is an important thing to consider when we're talking about the archetype of Chiron. And I think that the wounded healer piece plays into this because, it's through the places where we're wounded that it teaches us, oh, I really got to show up for myself here. Oh, I've got to show up for others here because it sucks when this wound gets activated, right? And I think this is part of the way that we can step into that hero role, and that hero role can look very different, right, in different situations for different people at different times. It's not always about like being the dude on the top of the burning car like waving the flag, right, which makes a great picture and is pretty awesome and is very inspiring, but being heroic can also be like caring for other people who are scared, right? It can be showing up and supporting like people in your community, even though you don't want to, right? Even though you're scared. It can be helping people talk through difficult situations, right? It can just be like being kind to people. And I think these are all like very heroic acts. Right. And so we think about Chiron as the teacher of heroes and the sun, right, is the kind of archetype of the heroic. It is our authenticity and our aspirational nature. It is what we strive for, as well as who we truly are. And in this sextile, which is a supportive aspect, we have an opportunity to tune into what it really means to be a hero and to show up as the hero of our own story, which I think is pretty cool. And when I remember to do that, I have a better time, right? And so, what does it look like to be the hero of your tale? What does that look like for you? And how do we step into this heroic nature? And again, this can look a lot of different ways, but I think it has a lot to do with just saying yes to the path that is laid out before us. And it calls us to really honor our personal sun, right? And we all have different suns, we all have different paths, right? We all aspire to different things, and one sun is not better than the other, right? And the sun is beautiful because it shines on all of us equally. The sun doesn't judge, right? The sun isn't like, oh, you did that bad thing to that person in seventh grade, right? So you don't get any sunlight. That's not how that works. Right. The sun shines on all of us equally. And I think part of being heroic or part of showing up as our own personal hero is really stepping into the sun and claiming our place in the sun because I claim my place, right? Or you claim your place doesn't mean that somebody else doesn't get theirs. right? What it actually does is it gives other people permission to stand in that light, right? To be able to stand in their place in the sun. And I think that this is some heroic shit right there, right? And I think that, being a hero or stepping into the heroic, right, calls us to really honor our personal sun and that inner wisdom that helps us to be in alignment with that inner authentic sense of self. And as we tune into that authentic part and as we walk on this path, right, as we claim our place in the sun, it allows us to shine our light into the world. And this, my friends, I think is a very heroic act, especially in these difficult times where the forces of empire and the forces of oppression are trying to suppress that, right? And crush like individuality and seeking assimilation, right? And a really like gross form of assimilation that is based on like, hierarchy and ethnic cleansing. And so if we think about Chiron through the context of the wound, we can think about the times where it was not all right to be ourselves, right? Or to show our light. And we can consider the lessons that we have learned from these experiences that have allowed us to come into better alignment with ourselves. I have found that it is a place where I have found that it's the places that I've dimmed my light or even abandoned myself that have given me really valuable information about who I truly am. And it has allowed me to really take that information and to prioritize honoring myself. And it's helped me to kind of orient to this authentic part of me that stays consistent. And to come back into that alignment, which feels a hell of a lot better than the places where I'm like people pleasing or like abandoning myself. However, this really requires us to recognize the places where we drift away from ourselves and to that from that core alignment, right? In order to shift these patterns. And so the Chiron sextile to the sun can help us really recognize that drift and notice, okay, I find myself all the way over here, right? How do I get back to that inner light and that core alignment and to really begin to correct it? And I found this that really good medicine for the sun is being around people who actually see you and appreciate you for who you truly are, not what you do for them or the sort of persona that we put on, but like the people who actually see us and respect us and care about us, right? The sun here is still in Gemini, and so we can use feedback from trusted friends to support this shift back into our alignment. We can think about going on fact-finding missions that can provide permission for us to be ourselves. We can also get really curious about the places where we go into people pleasing or other like types of fawning behaviors, or we move into fight or flight or freeze, right? Which are all kind of survival strategies, can also be trauma responses. And if we can find information from the people, places, and things that help us to feel safe enough to be ourselves, right? That can really be supportive in like cultivating that inner light and allowing us to feel safe enough to shine it, right? And when we find places where we can be in connection and these spaces and relationships and situations that support us, we can practice stating our needs, our desires, right? And feeling safe and supported enough to be who we actually are. And this is a very heroic act, right? Instead of the persona that we have created to get by, to fit in, right? To survive. And so in the story of Chiron, it is Hercules, the hero, a total solar figure, right? This like, masculine, heroic dude who's like rushing in and doing labors, right? Right? It is this solar Hercules hero, right? Who gives Chiron his incurable wound by accidentally shooting him with an arrow dipped in hydra poison, which has no cure. This is the solar ego trying to be heroic and totally like making a mess of things, which we all do from time to time, right? We try and show up in our best way, like we make a total mess of it. That can be okay. This too is a learning experience, right? And at the end of the long and tragic tale of Chiron, it's Hercules who redeems himself and Chiron by brokering a deal with Zeus for Chiron to take Prometheus's place chained to a rock that allows Chiron to finally be released from his pain and suffering. For Chiron, the liberation comes from letting go. Hercules, the hero, creates the conditions for Chiron to stop struggling and to surrender his ego ideas of needing to hold on and suffer, right? Needing to be like the teacher, needing to be the healer, needing to heal himself, right? And finally, Chiron is able to be like, you know what? I'm good. I had enough of this. I surrender. I let go, right? And through that surrender and that letting go of this old identity, right, and opening to a bigger possibility of what his fate can bring, he is freed from his pain and suffering. So, with this Chiron sextile to the sun, we can think about the ways that we can let go of old, outdated notions of who we are supposed to be and what we think we are supposed to do, and allow just a little bit of surrender to create the space for some ease that can maybe open the path to who we can be and what the universe may have in store for us. And when we let go of the ego ideals of, I need to do this or be that in order to survive, and kind of loosen our grip on these old stories, something new and much more freeing can come into our lives. And so, also on Tuesday, June the 17th, we have Mars entering Virgo. So, Mars in the Mercury ruled sign of Virgo uses their sword to separate, right? Virgo is all about breaking things down to their most essential components. So we can think about Virgo as being related to the digestive process, right? That begins at our mouth as we chew and masticate our food and then swallow it into our digestive tract, where our stomach acids further separate the food into digestible nutrients that we need for life and what needs to be eliminated. You can think about Mars in Virgo in relationship to these processes. Mars, right, as the teeth, right, that cut things into smaller pieces and more manageable pieces, and the heat of the stomach acid that further breaks things down. The cutting and heating or burning qualities of Mars are directed in Virgo towards separating things out into different categories and components. What is usable from what is waste, what is pure from what is tainted, which that last one can also be really weaponized in some messed up ways if we're not careful. Right. So also these like ideas of like what is pure and impure, we got to be very conscious of that, especially when we apply it to a world that is multivalent. You know what I'm saying? So Virgo is about discernment. And this is a good word to consider with Mars, the planet of conflict and battle in this sign. The discerning powers of Virgo can really help Mars decide what battle is worth fighting and what is not worth like spending that energy on. And this is speaking from the perspective of somebody, this guy right here, who's got two thumbs and Mars in Virgo. This guy, right? And what I've learned from that, right, is it's a really important lesson to know what battles to fight, right, and what hill we want to die on, and to be discerning about where we put that vital martial energy, right? And, discerning what actions to take and what struggles are worth engaging in. Virgo really seeks to purify and perfect. And I think about this as kind of like sharpening the blade of Mars, right? And then using that blade to cut away what is unnecessary or extraneous in order to leave only the most vital parts of what we are working with. Virgo is a harvest sign. It's all about separating the wheat from the chaff. We can think about the blade of Mars being used to cut down these wheat stalks and perform the harvest, and then using it to strip away the waste so that we are left with only the most vital nutrients. On the flip side, we want to not let perfection be the enemy of good enough. And I think that this is really important wisdom with the Virgo archetype. We don't want to prevent ourselves from taking action because it's not good enough or it doesn't meet some idealized vision of perfection, right? Mars in Virgo strives for excellence, but it can overwork itself or feel the kind of paralysis of choice. However, the blade of Mars can be used to really cut through the like bundle of thoughts that gets like real tight and spins us out, right? And as it slices through, right, just like leaves this space of clarity, right, which I found can be really helpful. I think of Mars as being like a different type of blade or a different quality of fire in each of the signs that it moves through. And in Virgo, I see Mars as like a scalpel, right? Making these very precise incisions to perform its task. Or as like a blowtorch, delivering like a really focused heat exactly where it needs to go to get the job done. When it's functioning well, right? Mars is in Virgo, right? Mars is like an economy of movement directed in the right way to deliver the energy right where it needs to go to achieve the goal. When it's functioning unskillfully, it can show up as overworking, right? Or just engaging in sort of menial tasks because it feels obligation or guilt if it doesn't do its best at everything. And so again, I think using that discernment to really understand where is it, like, where do I need to put this energy? Where is the best place for this energy to go? Instead of being like, oh, I always need to be doing my best. Because, straight up, we cannot always do our best at everything, right? We can try our best, but sometimes we got to cut it off and be like, I'm good here. This is good enough. I'm moving on so that we save some of that vital energy to direct towards the things that we really care about. And when I was in grad school, I got this piece of advice, which was incredibly valuable for me, which I think is applicable kind of across the board. And they were like, just jump through the hoops that you need to jump through so that you can save your energy and direct it into the things that are the most important to you and the things that you really care about. And I think that this is really good wisdom for Mars and Virgo. Okay, let me hydrate and then we'll talk about Wednesday, June the 18th. All right, excellent. So on Wednesday, June the 18th, we have Jupiter in Cancer squaring Neptune in Aries. I didn't write the degrees down, so I don't know. Look it up for yourself. Um, Probably at the very early degrees because Jupiter just moved into Cancer rather recently. So, Jupiter is a planet of abundance. And in Cancer, this sense of abundance helps to support life and growth. It is the reserves that we have that allow us to develop and stretch beyond the stuck places in our lives, right? That allow us to become more than what we are, right? Jupiter, especially when they are well resourced, like they are in Cancer, which is the sign of their exaltation, can be really generous. Jupiter can really hook people up. And I talked about generosity in, I think, my last report or the one before that. And they all kind of like run together into a mash of manic Mondays. Um, but wait, you know, I like thinking about generosity, right, and giving in ways that are not like tied to money, right? I mean, money is a great like way to be generous, and sometimes that's what we have to give. But there are multiplicity of other ways that we can be generous, right? We can be generous with our knowledge, which is very Jupiterian, by the by, as well as with our time or our attention. We can also be generous with our compassion, our kindness, our care. And again, part of this practice of generosity is being able to offer these things back to ourselves and the ability to sort of fill our own cups so that they runneth over and help other people out. Because it's really hard to give from a place of lack or a scarcity mentality. And it's hard to fill ourselves up only through the positive feedback of others. Because no matter how hard you try, and I have practiced this, I have tested this out, right? We cannot control other people or how they respond to our actions, right? And so we may be like, "Oh, I'm so generous," and people might be like, whatever." And then, we feel some type of way about that because we are expecting other people to behave the way that we want them to, which is never going to work, right? So, let's look at Neptune in the square, right? Neptune can be incredibly altruistic. They have that far out cosmic sense that everything is all one, right? And so when we give others what we are giving, right? When we give others, we are actually giving to ourselves. This is the story that Neptune has, which I think is pretty accurate. However, my friends, we happen to live in this sub-Saturnian world, which is limited by the hard edges of material and physical reality. And in this world, we all have needs, as much as we would like to ignore them or actively try to ignore them. And the sort of cosmic oneness of Neptunian consciousness can become pretty depressed or despondent when it comes to the limitations of reality. And so in the square with Jupiter, Neptune can want to give and give and give and give, and can easily fall into the role of the rescuer or redeemer, right? Or the flip side of that, the victim or martyr, right? That feeling when we give until we are depleted, and then we get really burnt out and feel empty. And oftentimes, right, this leads to resentments. I don't know if any of y'all have ever felt that, but like, yeah, this dude has, right? Oh, I'm like, here, take this, take this, take this, take this, and then being like, oh my God, like I never get anything back. No one ever like appreciates the things that I do for them. Blah, 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 blah. Right? Or we run into like maybe rescue other people who have not asked for help, right? Being like, oh, I will save you, right? We might not get the feedback that we hope for, which right shows that like puts us in that victim martyr role, right? And kind of activates that tape or that story. Oh, nobody appreciates all the things that I do for them or how much I had to sacrifice. So Jupiter can hold the story that we have endless capacity, right? Which can be great until we recognize that we have far exceeded our actual capacity. Jupiter is expansive and eternally optimistic, and Neptune can be downright delusional. And so we may very easily lose sense of what our limits and our boundaries are come midweek. We find ourselves getting lost in idealistic fantasies or not being able to see the places where we are overextended or out of our lane and running on empty. So, with this transit, we really want to consider the relationship between our ideals and our reality. I want to do this, but like these are the constraints that I'm living within, right? It's really valuable to have big dreams and idealistic visions, right? And as Carolyn Casey says, and I love this, imagination lays the track for the reality train, right? But we also have to consider the places where these dreams meet the actual physical lived reality that we're existing in. you know and sometimes we can become depressed or frustrated if reality doesn't fit perfectly into our ideal vision. And this is life, my friends. The question here is, how do we put our ideals into practice and help them become our future reality? Neptune loves to dream, and Jupiter says, dream bigger, my friend. And when they are in this hard aspect, we may find ourselves looking at situations through rose-colored glasses, which can be really helpful, especially given the state of this world where it's like easy to just spiral into depression, right? But our dreams are not really going to fulfill themselves just through dreaming. Right? We need to take action to bring these dreams down to earth. And again, this is Jupiter in Cancer, the capacity to invest our emotional energy in the things that we care about. So this is a really good time to allow the dreams to come while also considering some action steps that we can take to help ourselves fulfill them. And again, Neptune is a pretty delulu type of guy, right? We may find ourselves wrapped up in the energy of the collective. Spiritual or nationalistic or even political dogma from any end of the spectrum may be really strong this week and may have like kind of a tidal pull on us. And our individual identity may get swept up or dissolved into the ideals or dogmas of larger movements. It's really important to check in with our own internal wisdom and our value system as an anchor point so we don't get swept away and pulled off course. After we check in with ourselves, we may decide that we are in alignment with this or that tide. But we want to make sure that we are not abandoning ourselves as we get swept up, especially during transit that kind of amplifies illusion and idealism. So there's an opportunity to expand our connection to something bigger than ourselves. But we want to make damn sure that that is the thing that we actually want to be connected with. and we're not just being taken for a ride or bamboozled by somebody else's ideals that cause us to compromise our own. And so, lastly, my teacher Stephen Forrest talks about Neptune as Jupiter without Saturn. And I love this image, right? Saturn creates the container or the limitation for Jupiter to expand within, right? And without that container, Jupiter just continues to expand and expand and expand until it kind of dissipates and becomes that like all encompassing Neptunian consciousness. Last week and mid this week, Jupiter contacts both, uh, yeah, uh, like on Sunday and then Wednesday, Jupiter like contacts both Neptune and Saturn and gets to really negotiate these hard aspects, which help them to learn about how to work with the limitations of reality, while providing an opportunity to envision something beyond those restrictions, which I think is really important, right? But both of these lessons are really valuable. We want to learn to integrate both of them instead of being pulled too far into the limitations of Saturn or the it's all good man of Neptune, right? And so something to really sit with this week is like, how do we both sit with the vision and the dream and that expansive and all-encompassing nature while also honoring the limitations of the reality that we find ourselves in? Okay, great. Moving along to Friday, June the 20th. On this day, Friday, June the 20th, Saturn enters Cancer, which, my friends, marks the summer solstice, which occurs at 7:42 p.m. Pacific time and 10:42 in the p.m. Eastern time. So let's just talk about the archetype of Cancer for a moment, and then I'll just talk about some solstice ideas and mythologies. So, Cancer is about where we invest our emotional energy and how we protect that investment. Cancer is represented by the crab, right? Who has that external shell that protects their vulnerable insides, their delicious, buttery insides. Right? Um, it's the places where it makes us think about the places that we put our emotional energy are like really vulnerable because we really care about the things that we love. And so we want to protect them and prevent those things from being hurt or abducted by ice. You know what I'm saying? Just as we want to protect ourselves, right, from being hurt, right? Um, we like really those vulnerable places are pretty tender, right? Because we don't want them like exposed to the world and to be like picked at or eaten by birds or, carried off by the fascists, right? So we like really want to protect those things. And it's the things that we are seeking to nourish and care for, right, are also like the things that are really worth protecting. And Cancer reminds us that part of care is caring for things, and as we care for things, they care for us, right? And so we have the like crab claw that like keeps things away or like grabs onto the things that we care about and like holds on to them tightly, and that shell that protects these things from being exposed. So we surround the parts of us that are tender with these hard things to protect them. You can think about that as like traumas or past wounds that we seek to hide away or keep safe or build defenses around so that they don't become activated, right, or rewounded. We also might do this with the people and things that we love that are important to us, right? As is the case of the Norse myth of Balder the Bright. So we're going to move into story time right now and talk about the myth of Balder the Bright. So the North myth, this is the Norse myth of the battle between light and dark, and it has to do with the twin gods Balder and Horder. Balder is the god of illumination who is associated with the sun. He has a dream one night where he sees his own death. And he awakes from this dream and is like depressed and despondent because he's afraid that he might actually die. He's afraid that this is a prophetic dream and it might come true. So he's just like moping around all day, won't eat any food, won't talk to anybody. And Frigga, his mom, who is the goddess of childbirth and mothers, is like, Balder, my baby, the bright one, what's wrong? And he's like, nothing, mom. And she's like, Balder, I know you. What's wrong? And he's like, oh, mom, I had this dream where I died and I'm really scared. And Frigga was not about to stand around and do nothing, right? And let her little beautiful baby die. So she goes to Midgarth, Earth, our Earth realm. Uh, and she goes around to all the things that populate Earth: fire, water, iron, all the metals, the ground, the dirt, the stones, the trees, poisons, birds, beasts, sicknesses of all kinds, anything that might hurt her baby. And she extracts from them an oath that they would do Balder no harm. And so this effectively rendered Balder, the bright god of light, invincible. And so all the gods, right, make a game of throwing dangerous objects at Balder to amuse themselves because, nothing can hurt him. And so all of these things just miss him or bounce off, right? And so he's just walking around and, everybody's throwing stuff at him. And it's just like bing, 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 bing. And all the gods are like, ha, 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 let's try this, right? But one day, Loki, the trickster, who is kind of holding a grudge with Odin, Balder's dad, over Odin's treatment of Loki's children, right? He was like pretty envious of Balder and the sort of lengths that Frigga went through to protect her sweet little baby boy, right? And so Loki, the trickster, very clever, hatches a plan. And he changes himself into an old woman and he goes to visit Frigga. And he talks to her for hours over endless cups of tea and asks her questions. And, like, they're just like a couple of chatty Cathys. And he learns from Frigga Balder's only vulnerability. Because everything, my friends, that is invincible has some place where they remain vulnerable. And I think this is really important to remember, especially as we come up against situations where it's like, oh my God, there's no way I can defeat this monster. Everything has a vulnerability. And so for Balder, it turns out that there was one plant on Midgarth that Frigga had not gotten to agree to the oath, the seemingly harmless mistletoe. And so, with this knowledge in hand, Loki carves himself a dart from the unassuming mistletoe. And Loki arrives back at the game where all the gods are hurling bricks and axes and Molotov cocktails and broken bottles at Balder. And he discovers Horder, the blind twin brother of Balder, kind of hanging out nearby. And Loki's like, hey, why aren't you playing? And Horder says, well, I can't see anything. And I don't want to like just throw something in some random direction. And I also don't have any weapon. So I can't really play this game. And Loki's like, oh, bro, this game is the best. It's so much fun. Here, I'll help you. I have this dart that I just happen to be carrying around. Why don't you take this and I'll, kind of orient you and like help you to throw it and like get you to really, get you on track. Right? And so Horder lets go of the dart. And I just imagine it like flying in slow motion, right? Kind of like missing all of the other gods, just like slowly, slowly, slowly spinning, right? All the other gods look over at it and it penetrates the impenetrable wall and hits Balder in the neck. And uh, he drops dead, right? Fulfilling this prophetic dream. And so Balder descends into the underworld, where he becomes the guest of Hel, the goddess of the underworld. But Frigga, mother of the gods, had an absolute meltdown that her precious son, Balder the Bright, was struck down. She sends a message to the queen of the underworld, asking to bring Balder back to life, because all of the living beings in the world were mourning his death. Hel, the queen of the underworld, wanted proof of this claim and said that if every being on Midgarth, our Earth realm, would actually cry for the loss of the light, she would be convinced and would return Balder. If even one being did not cry, Balder could not return. And so, in the story of Yule, right, all of the living beings, birds, bees, beetles, fish, beasts of all manner, right, even the ones that live deep in the sea with those dangly lights on their heads, right, and every human being, right, we all call out for the return of the light. And Balder is thus rescued by his mother, who, in her joy, kisses every person who stands beneath the mistletoe with her. Right? And so this is a story of the solstice, right? The bright, Balder the Bright, the god of the sun, being struck down and going into the underworld, right? Where they arrive at the winter solstice, the time of the least amount of light, where we all kind of like call out and light fires and celebrate to call the light back into the world. And this is the sort of rhythm of the tide of light and dark in which we live in, right? On Midgard, right? Spaceship Earth. In the pagan tradition of the summer solstice, the which is the brightest moment of the year, right? It's pictured as a battle between the Oak King and the Holly King. And at midsummer, the Oak King, who rules over the light, is slain by the Holly King, the Dark King, representing the decline of the sun and the return of the world into dormancy and darkness. And from the summer solstice, right, in that battle where the Holly King defeats the supremacy of the light, we begin to, sink downwards as the year is dying. And then at the winter solstice, the Oak King overcomes the Holly King, and we begin rising up into the light as the days get a little bit longer. Right? And so, as this battle takes place and the supremacy of the light begins to fade after it reaches its peak with the summer solstice on the 20th, we can think of solar consciousness, right? Which is high in the sky and reigns supreme now, right? This idea of solar consciousness being associated with the increase in dominance of the light. Solar consciousness deals with logic and rational thinking. It is individualistic and goal oriented. It is about independence and clarity. It likes to see and be seen. It likes to separate things and to really know them. Night consciousness, which rules during the winter months and the winter solstice, is intuitive and more emotional. It's about coming together and connecting because in the wintertime, we need each other to survive, right? Outlines kind of become blurred and shapes merge in the dark. It is nonlinear and values the symbolic and intuitive ways of knowing. It's more about feeling than knowing. It's more about shifting forms and states than the consistency that day consciousness brings. And so, as we reach the tipping point of the summer solstice, where this rational solar consciousness reigns supreme, yet it slowly begins to lose its power as we descend towards the autumn equinox. And each day, the night consciousness grows in power. The Holly King grows in power just a little bit, balancing things out from the individual to the relational and the logical to the intuitive. And we are always reaching towards one of these states and swinging back and forth between one and the other as the light increases and decreases here on planet Earth. Okay, moving right along. And happy solstice, everybody, or upcoming solstice. And, as I sort of started this show off, I think it's also really important as the sun takes up the most time in our year to really like walk out and like claim our place in that light, right? To claim our place in the sun. And, that can look a lot of different ways to a lot of different people, but just something to consider, right? As the day reigns supreme, like how do I step into my place in the light? So, Sunday, June the 22nd, Mars in Virgo sextiles Jupiter in Cancer. And man, it is hot in here. Okay, this transit offers some support between Jupiter, who wins favor and influences people through gifts and offering charity and building institutions, right? And Mars, who gets things done through force and action. Whereas Jupiter brings people to their side through the carrot. Oh, here, come over here. Like, I'll cook you dinner, right? Oh, like, we'll give you a grant, right? Mars takes action and gets things done through using the stick, right? Oh, you're going to do this right now, or there's going to be serious consequences. As these two planets come into a supportive aspect, a supportive sextile, we get to use Jupiter's wisdom to help support us in taking right action. In Buddhism, the idea of right action refers to actions that are taken in accordance with wisdom and compassion. Jupiter in Cancer exalted can offer both of these qualities to Mars, whose job it is to just like act and get things done. Mars doesn't really think about it. Mars is like, oh, that thing, smash it now. Oh, that thing, I'm going over there. I'm hungry. I eat now. Right. But, so Jupiter can really like help support Mars and being like, hey, like maybe if you cook that food first, it would taste better and be easier to digest. Right. And something to consider is if we are acting from a place of a wound or a deficit, right, or from places of fear, anger, aggression, or scarcity, it can really cloud our judgment. And so Jupiter offers us the ability to kind of see the bigger picture and to tell a different story. Jupiter's wisdom helps us to be grounded in the present and operate from a more resourced place. And Mars in Virgo helps us to integrate this wisdom and discern which actions will bring benefit to myself and others, and which actions may increase suffering, right? Mars in Virgo really helps breaking things down and cutting things out so we can operate with clarity. Jupiter helps to expand the narrow view of action oriented Mars, right? Jupiter's like, hey, maybe like if we didn't smash that thing, it could go better, right? Just a thought, just a thought, right? Then Mars helps Jupiter to cut out some of the excess that may be clouding their thinking. So with this transit, we can consider what is the next right thing, right? And what is the right action to take in this emerging moment, right? It helps us to really get present and be like, okay, like what is the right thing to do right now? Jupiter brings a lot of optimism and ideally wisdom to the table. And I think that this can really help Mars, who mobilizes that sense of optimism to direct our energy in a certain direction. Sextiles take a little bit of work to activate, so we may not launch a business on this day or even do very much, but we can just feel supported, right, in our energetic levels and feel good about the things that we are doing. The eagle-eyed view of Jupiter helps us to have a bigger perspective, which can reveal the right course of action at this time. And this perspective shift can be really helpful in recognizing our motivations for what we desire and the things that we are trying to do. We also might notice that we have a bit more energy today, which might also conflict with the Sun Saturn square, which we are going to be experiencing later in this day. So on one hand, we may feel empowered, and at the same time feeling kind of like restricted and limited in what we can get done. And this is all right. We can allow both things to be present. And I think that this is the expansive capacity of Jupiter, right? And again, the limitations of the Sun square Saturn may help us to gain a different angle on what is the right action to take, right? And what are some of the consequences of the actions that we are engaging in, right? And sometimes the right action is non-action. And that's important to remember, especially with Mars, right? Especially with Mars in Virgo, which just wants to like be perfect, right? And sometimes the right thing to do is nothing at all. Sometimes just sitting and waiting, right? Sometimes it's just taking a walk instead of getting frustrated and banging our heads against the wall. And if we find ourselves in this place, right, we may consider expanding the range of activities that we can engage in, or the experiences we are having, which might ultimately help to support our personal growth in really cool ways. So if we find ourselves just like banging against the wall and getting really frustrated, what is it like to just shift 90 degrees, right? Oh, let me go over there. Let me try something different, right? Let me call a friend. Let me ask for help, instead of kind of lamenting what isn't working. or the places where things are not going according to plan, because this can be a great gift. Because sometimes our plans are way too narrow. And if we can take that eagle eyed Jupiterian view, it might help to shift some things a little bit and allow maybe a new path to emerge, which is maybe ultimately a better place to put our energy. Okay, my friends, coming up on the last transit of the week, also occurring on Sunday, June the 22nd, when we have the Sun in Cancer squaring Saturn in Aries. And I apologize, I didn't put down the degrees of that one as well. You can figure it out for yourselves. And no matter what the degrees are, like you'll be experiencing it. Okay, so one of the things that we can consider here: self gratification versus our responsibility. What do I want to do versus what do I have to do? Or what do I feel like I should do? The sun in Cancer is about emotional awareness, and it looks to nourish and nurture itself and others. Saturn deals with duty and responsibility. Oftentimes, our responsibilities may feel not very nourishing, right? And the commitments that we make may not feel very supportive to the emotional experience that we are having. And this can be difficult, right? And squares create friction, and friction leads to action. And ultimately, the square seeks to integrate these seemingly opposing principles, or these principles that feel at cross purposes. And so, with this transit, we are asked to recognize those places of misattunement, right? And where and the places where our emotional needs and our responsibilities are kind of butting heads, right? And the feelings are at cross purposes with our commitments. And this is all right because it can reveal some very interesting information which can help us to make the necessary adjustments to bring our situation into a better balance, right? Where maybe some of our commitments and responsibilities are also like helping to nourish and nurture us, right? So that we feel emotionally secure or emotionally fulfilled, right? The sun represents our own individual eternal internal sovereignty. Saturn represents external authority. In this square, we are asked to navigate the places where our individual sense of self butts heads with the external forces and the rules that govern us, as well as the limitations we encounter that kind of curtail the ways that we express ourselves and our agency to make our own choices. Saturn is currently in their fall in the sign of Aries, a place where the sun is exalted, which is kind of interesting because the sun has like some street cred there, but Saturn has zero, and Saturn has a hard time, right? Saturn's journey through Aries will seek to put limitations on individual expression, and it will work really hard to resist the forces of change and new growth as it seeks to really maintain the status quo. So, one of the themes of Saturn in Aries, which is really being accentuated by the Sun square to Saturn, is the reclaiming of our internal authority from external forces. Right? Oftentimes, we outsource our inner authority onto external entities like governments, leaders, politicians, parents, teachers, bosses, partners, institutions, right? You name it, it's like you got to do this, and we're like, okay, yes, please, right? Here, tell me what to do. Right? We offer up our agency to these outside forces for various reasons, right? To feel safe, to stay out of trouble, to receive direction, to receive validation, to get money, to survive, right? However, when we do this, it tends to leave us with a feeling of powerlessness, and it can really result in feelings of emptiness and frustration. Because when we give our power away, we have less control over the choices that we get to make that really impact our life path, and we end up living in somebody else's world. And usually we pay a really high rent to be able to stay there. As the sun, that sense of inner sovereignty, squares off with Saturn, the external forces of control, we are asked to reclaim our authority. This can look a number of different ways. But we want to consider is all the places where we have outsourced control and responsibility. And how can we begin calling that back and reclaiming it? We're at a time where the government is really seeking to suppress and repress individual liberties and freedoms, right? These solar freedoms that we have. This is full on Saturn and Aries trying to kind of stamp out new growth that threatens the existing order and the status quo. And so we are seeing this through state violence, defunding programs that benefit communities and individuals and authoritarian actions that seek to repress dissent, right, while privileging the status quo and those with wealth and power. And so, how do we call back that personal power from corporations, from Instagram, from Google, right? From Elon Musk, right? From the government, right? How do we call back that personal power and reconnect with the ability to make our own choices about the course of our life instead of handing it over, right, in the form of our data or our attention, right? Or being like, oh, I need this platform or I'm gonna die or I like can't survive. This is how I make my money, and like straight up, I'm here, you know what I'm saying? But, thinking about the energy and attention that we put into it and how do we redirect that and put that into ourselves, right? And so this may not happen on a systemic scale through this transit, but as we each consider personal autonomy and the places where that has been handed over, we can begin to reconnect with it and call back some of our power in order to support our authentic selves instead of the external demands. And as we do this on an internal level, it begins to weaken the forces of control who are applying great pressure to force assimilation and obedience. And to that I say, no gods, no masters. And on an external level, we can think about the sun as related to rulers and kings. However, Saturn deals with reality and the limitations of reality. So, on the world stage, we are seeing leaders who are seeking to consolidate power. However, Saturn in the square may show the limits of those abilities. Example, Trump's military parade that like 15 people went to while millions of people protested him, right? Because a leader is nothing without the will of their people, right? A leader by nature is outnumbered. They only rule through the belief, right, that is invested in them by the collective that they are a fit leader. As individuals begin to reclaim their authority from these external forces of government, right, it weakens the leaders whom people have outsourced their authority to, and thus weakening the leader's ability to hold on to and maintain power. So, with this sun in Cancer, we are considering how we hold, utilize, and share this vital emotional energy. Right. And one of the techniques of this administration has been to like activate and mobilize that emotional energy by through fear and frustration and outrage. Right. Which, I think these things are important, but we really need to watch out how they are being manipulated and how they steal our power, right? How they can spiral us into feelings of powerlessness and hopelessness and depression, right? Cancer asks us to consider what we really care about and what is worth investing that vital emotional energy into. And this is a really important orientation point, especially in the current chaos of the world. So, with this square, really thinking about that, how precious that emotional energy is, right? And it will get activated, right? Because we're human and this happens, right? And but thinking about, okay, how do I like shift this activation into support for the things that I care about, right? Or how do I put this energy into the things that I care about instead of operating from a place of fear, right? Or which brings us into a powerless place, right? These places of frustration, this place of outrage, right? It like saps our power. But when we can notice it and come into community and support each other, I think it's a way of revitalizing that energy and sharing that energy so it amplifies and doesn't just get sucked away into the matrix, right? And feed these sort of powers of control. And yeah, astrology by Moonlight says I'm down with OPP, other own personal power. Hell yeah. And also, I'm down with other people's power, right? Collective power, horizontal power, right? Which I think is very Pluto and Aquarius and is the antidote to vertical power, which we've been living under for so long. And I think we are ready for a change. And I think that that change is already happening. And, I like to think that we're all a part of it. And so just really honoring your vital emotional energy and how valuable it is, and to really consider where you want to direct that, where you want to spend it, and to also consider like how do you claim your place in the sun and stand there, and how does that inspire others to be able to stand in the sun as well. And with that, my friends, I will bid you a fond farewell. I think I have talked more than long enough, and I need to go sit in front of a fan and hydrate for a while. But I appreciate you all being here. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Joan Emerson Bell. I'm an astrologer, tarot reader, and licensed mental health counselor. I am available for tarot and astrology readings and astrological coaching. Hit me up on my website, campwizardcamp.com, or you can DM me on the Instagrams at Blind Stallion Space Wizard, underscores between the words. And I don't know. Yeah, hit me up. I'll help you out, or we can just talk, whatever. I love talking. I also do a sometimes weekly astrology themed radio show called the Melee Report. I didn't get around to doing it this week, which I'm a little bummed about because I had a great playlist, but hopefully I'll integrate that into next week's excellent episode. You can find that on SoundCloud under Camp Wizard Camp. Yeah. I don't know. It's really cool. It's like this, but more rock, less talk. And I go through the transits of the week and put them to music. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. What else do I have to say? Oh, I am going to be co-facilitating a retreat in Epidavros, Greece, September 20th through 27th. It's going to be an awesome time. It will be life-changing. I'm co-facilitating it with Sarah Janes, who is a dream worker and mythologist, and we're going to be talking about sacred waters, sacred springs. We're going to be talking about mythology, dream working practices, ways of sort of living out the myths, being in the kind of lunar consciousness, the dream consciousness, operating from there. We're going to do a bunch of magic. I'll be talking about the water signs in the chart. It's going to be a blast. You can sign up. I have a link in my bio on Instagram, and I'll put a link in the show notes on the YouTube. And with that, my friends, that is all the astro weather that is fit to print. Thank you so much for tuning in, and yeah, taking this in. I hope that this helps somebody out there. I really appreciate your vital attention, and yeah, I hope you all have a great week in space. Until next time, my friends, be good to yourselves, be good to each other, and as always, may the force be with you. Bye now.